How did that go again? Oh, yeah, something like only the white man is lost enough to believe he can cut the end off of a blanket, sew it to the other side of the blanket, and believe he has a longer blanket. Um, this said to be a Native American on the idiocy that is daylight losing's crime. Which, of course, you may know as daylight savings time. Yeah. A weird thing, this. And this is my semi annual rant on the topic. Look, clock time is already strange enough. And clock time is convenient if you want to show up for my regular Wednesday transmission at 11 a.m. Pacific time, for example. If you want to make a reading with me at the time that we scheduled, if you're teaching a class, if whatever, right? Like we need the kind of cultural and communal convenience of clock time. I mean, these days, now that we're so global, we really need this convenience of time zones as well. But there's interesting truths like we used to call the height of the light every day, the sun at the reach. You astrologers should know that as the sun at the MC, right? Which is where the sun culminates every day, halfway between sunrise and sun rest. The sun will reach its daily height. We used to call that noon. Now we call it local apparent solar noon because noon has become this 12 p.m. on the clock thing, right? Which, I mean, sun reaching its height. This is the end of the sun's daily climb, the beginning of the sun's daily decline, right? It's an astronomical thing. But importantly, like that happens in, well, I'll say Sacramento before it does in San Francisco, because though we are in the same time zone, I live in the Bay Area, so I'll call that San Francisco. Though I'm in the same time zone as the capital in Sacramento, they are east of me. And so they actually experience sunrise before I do, which means they also experience sun reach before I do, right? So that idea of true noon, the sun's culmination, when the daily shadow is shortest, that's a very localized experience. And I encourage you to connect with it. I teach my students to build old school sundials and earth wheels to honor the true movement of the sun and the moon and the stars, the moving stars, the planets through the houses. But let me bring that in another time. For now, back to my rant. So, clock time is already unnatural, right? Like, noon doesn't happen at noon. And you can hear Isabel barking about this weirdness too, right? So, we have this clock noon thing, which, depending on where you are in the seasons, may happen before true noon when the sun culminates, or after true noon. Yeah. I mean, Isabel's like really ranting about the whole thing, and so am I. And I do it every year, twice a year, at this crime time of daylight's losing crime, as I call it. So, daylight savings time, what are we saving? Do you know it used to be called wartime? Enough said. Now, I mean, it can be convenient. Like these days, we wake up and we drive a kid to school, and it takes a little while. He goes to school not too close to the home, somewhere between ours and his dad's place, closer to his dad's place. Anyway, I don't need to shift my rant into personal territory. And you get to this place and maybe October or something where it's pretty dark. The sun has not yet risen and we're up and motivating and taking him there. And then the November, which is in the month where we here in the United States do a daylight savings time or daylight losing crime thing. Just, what do you fall back, they say, an hour. And then suddenly we're driving him and the sun has risen. which is convenient and kind of nice, right? And then the opposite thing happened this weekend where we celebrated the wonders of daylight losing crime on Sunday, the day of the sun. And maybe it catches up to you most on a Monday because these days, the day of the moon, we don't take off to chill and dream and rest and nurture ourselves and each other as we should. Some of us do, but usually it's like when you're back to work, right? And the Monday blues and that kind of thing. Oh, it's interesting. Moon Day should get us into our feels, I guess. Um, Regardless, that's kind of when it hits most folks, right? It's like it's the Monday when that daylight losings crime thing just like it's weird. Um, but you know what happened between yesterday and the day before, right? So I started this with this statement that's said to have been spoken by a Native American chief, and I don't know who that was, but it's genius. Although, kind of mean. So prepare yourself. But it's only the white man is lost enough to believe he can cut the end off of a blanket, sew it to the other side of the blanket, and believe he has a longer blanket. Right on daylight losing's crime, which I really respect. And there's a couple states in the U.S. who don't participate. They are Hawaii and Arizona, the two places I most travel to connect with the living sky, because these are dark sky spaces. At least there's still dark sky spaces in both of those states. I grew up in Nevada, and so it was really interesting that like sometimes we were on the same clock time as Arizona, and sometimes it's an hour different. Like half the year it's the same, half the year it's different. So I always tripped on that. But now I really appreciate the just letting it be natural. So let me get a chart on the screen. I'll just show you a thing here. Buttons, buttons, buttons. If you're watching at Instagram, this will be really small and you might want to shift over to my YouTube page. GeminiBrett.com/YouTube will take you there, or GeminiBrett.com/Linktree as well. I'm just wanting to honor this. Comment that came in that says like Saskatchewan doesn't do this either. There's other states in the U.S. that are currently voting on whether it should be maintained or not. I'm just going to show you charts for Richmond, California, where I live. This is March 1st, Friday, Venus's Day, 2024. And the sun culminated here locally at 12:21 p.m. clock time that day. And then the next day, 12:21:19. The next day, 12:21:06. The next day, 12:20:53. Why is it changing? And the answer is because we're going through the seasons. 12:20:39, 12:20:25, 12:20:11, 12:19:56 on Friday, March 8th, 12:19:41 on Saturday, 1:19 on Sunday. What the heck? Daylight losing's crime, right? So if you follow the light, as I do, and I suggest you do too, and I think we all do, whether we do this consciously or not, less and less so with our bright street lights and all of our time in computer screens, and less time with the big light in your sky outside. But we're all children of the earth and the sun. There's just a natural flow of daylight growing longer until the longest day of the year, which is, of course, summer solstice, and then daylight growing shorter. These days, we believe an hour is a period of 60 minutes. Do you know how old that is? Look into it. Ain't that old. And interestingly, and I meant to rant about this on my weekly Wednesday jam this last week, but there wasn't enough time, or perhaps time management in both. But I'm really interested on how the 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds, that sexagesimal thing, that comes out of Babylon. So, by the way, do we believe come the 7 days in a week named after the 7 moving planets? But the 24 hours thing, it seems to come out of Egypt. So the 60 minutes in an hour and 24 hours in a day, it seems to be this combination. Now we see 24, at least in the Chinese solar year. And there's a lot of places where it shows up in our biology and in the sacred geometry, and I could go on and on. But I'm very interested in investigating like space and space time and time space. So I've been on that pursuit throughout my go, but especially in this last week. Actually, I've been really intrigued to kind of decode a lot of these things and try to find it in history. And what I read recently is like the division of an hour into 60 minutes. Like it really didn't even show up to like the 15th century. Can you believe that? Right? It's so like hours, like 24 hours had been working um, for some time, like way back in the day in Kemet, the place we now call Egypt. But they would just divide hours into like half hours or quarter hours. So like the clock face, like, clocks had to become pretty sophisticated for us to start dividing an hour into 60 periods of 60 minutes and 60 seconds, even more so. Right. And the 60 minutes were already being used to divide degrees of longitude and latitude. That whole scene kind of was created in Greece out of the sexagesimal numbering system in Babylon and what they were doing astronomically over there. For me, this stuff's intriguing. For many, it's like, whatever, dude. Tell me about the soul. What do I know? Let's talk about SOL, the sun, and the sun and earth. So these days we think an hour is 60 minutes long, or many do. Many of you are already working with planetary hours, as many of us call them. There's been different names throughout time. But it used to be, and those of you who have worked with the sundial, for example, understand that the hours in the winter, let me say it this way, the daylight hours in the winter are shorter than those in the summer. Because we used to just divide daylight, in other words, sunrise to sunset, into 12 equal divisions. And nighttime, in other words, sunset to sunrise, into 12 equal divisions. And therefore, unless you're around the equinox time, when generally speaking, we have equal light and equal shadow, you're either going to have much longer days or you're going to have longer nights, right? And when you look at the sun at midheaven, right, so true noon, the sun's culmination, you get to experience that shift throughout the course of the year. And even looking at it in clock time, it's intriguing, right? I was just sharing that like on March 9th here locally, the sun culminated at 12:19:41 p.m. on the clock. And on March 10th, Sunday, 1:19:25. Let me go back a few months, and I won't share this on the screen. I'm out of time. I got a student in just a bit here. But let me just share that like on December 10th, the sun culminated at 12:02 p.m. locally clock time, 12:02:39. If I go back into November, I'm looking at some 11:55s. And as early as 11:53, which here locally was November 5th, 11:52:58 a.m. sun at the MC. But the day before, November 4th, 12:52 p.m., right? So it's generally kind of roaming around noon or 12 p.m. on the clock. But when you do this daylight losing crime thing, you really take yourself out of that energetic flow. And if you're not conscious of this, I think it'll really get you. Just like when you go see a movie, because Dune 2, you should probably remind yourself that, yeah, there's going to be some subliminal badness happening in those previews and probably throughout the film. And if you just remind yourself of that on the way in, then you're way less subject to those nasty hidden psychological influences. Right? Just sort of like remembering, like, I'm gonna go watch, probably gonna see some violence and stuff, and that doesn't have to mean I'm experiencing my real life, right? And so if you're way more present with and tuned into the daylight losings crime, to the truth that time zones are convenient and civil hours, which is a 60-minute hour, that's convenient, but it's not natural, and then you also reconnect yourself to natural time, then you're going to be way less subject to forces that are happening in unconscious, subconscious, you could even say subliminal or subluminary zones of not having that awareness of this strange calendrical corruption most of us have somehow consented to by living in a place that's working not naturally with time, but unnaturally, and especially at these 2 times a year daylight losings crime. So there's my rant. I'd love to know what you have to say about it. If you're watching this video at a time that I currently perceive to be the future, please leave a comment, because I won't see any live comments. I'm about to be out. If you're watching this video, regardless of where you're watching it, hey, please give it a like. That really helps fuel the ship. I can't tell you how much people like the video. All right. Like, it really, really helps, and it helps my work. So I would appreciate that. If you know others who would benefit from witnessing things like this, please share it around. The other thing is, I'm going clock time live every Wednesday, Miraculous Mercury's Day, at 11 p.m. Pacific time. This Wednesday, I will actually be on a plane. And so I'm going to pre-record a thing that will premiere at that time. Definitely on my YouTube page, GeminiBrett.com/YouTube will take you to my live streams there. But I think also at the Facebook and Instagram spaces too, if I can figure out the ones and the zeros. So time for some lab work. See you in space, friends. Eyes to the sky. I will see you when stars align.